Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Ab Thaivallapil. Did I get that right? Cool.
Mhm.
Awesome. I'm currently working under the supervision of Ab at STEM Fellowship Journal. Ab is a PhD candidate at the University of Guelph with an expected completion in 2023. In 2013, he graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and Biotechnology from Wilfred Laurier University. Following this, in 2017, he completed his Bachelor of Applied Science in Occupational Health and Science from Ryerson University, and then went on to receive his Master's of Science in Epidemiology in 2019 from the University of Guelph. Ab has served as the managing editor of STEM Fellowship Journal since January of 2019 and has a strong passion for the promotion of STEM research in youth, a goal shared by my podcast. I recall when I submitted an article to the STEM Fellowship Journal, I was greeted by immediate and in-depth comments by Ab, helping me to push my thinking. I look forward to having this conversation with Ab and cannot wait to see where this leads. Thanks for your time today, Ab.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, yeah, really glad to have you on. You seem like a really, really smart, well-thought person, I guess. And so I'm really excited to have a conversation today. So I guess to start off, a question that I ask pretty much everybody is, what do you like about research? What motivates you to do research?
That's a good question. And I'll start off with a quote from Benjamin Franklin. He said, "Reading makes a full man, meditation a profound man, and discourse a clear man." And I think it's maybe not necessarily the research aspect that interests me, but the collaboration and the conversations and the healthy disagreements that go on in that area that really gravitated me towards that area and that discipline. So, simply put, that's what interests me in research. And then obviously a more detailed answer would be that I like solving problems and answering questions that perhaps haven't been answered before. And there's a lot of autonomy in that process. There's a lot of creativity that goes on. And obviously we know that at the end result of it, sometimes the publication has to be quite structured and has to follow certain rules. But the entire process from start to almost finish is quite creative, and I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I sort of agree with that in the sense of like the creativity aspect. I think it's sort of this interesting feeling once you publish something, because it's creativity to sort of mold the world to some extent, to mold the truth, right? Once you've published something, that becomes part of the scientific literature body, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's a really interesting feeling. It's a really interesting concept in general, just um, to yeah, to experience. Um,
Yeah.
so so what do you, in terms of like young people, I think one thing that I've noticed, so I've been running the high school big data challenge this year, where, for those listeners who might not know, high school students do research pertaining to big data, or I guess using big data, trying to answer a problem, I guess a societal problem of sorts. So this year we're doing clean and renewable energy at the communal and individual level. So it's helping kids to focus on something that would affect themselves or just a small community, as opposed to trying to solve the problem worldwide. Um, so my question for you, Ab, would be, for people like this who are in high school sort of level, what I often see is I see young people who they don't fully, either they don't fully realize what they're doing and then they submit a really great paper, or they get a little bit caught up in the issue of, like, this is, they realize what I just said, this is science, this is going to be the truth, right? And they sort of get a little bit, I guess, flustered by that. um, how do you suggest that people deal with that fear of, I have to keep this high standard, right? Or maybe am I the best person to do this research? Wouldn't it be better for like a PhD to do this research, right? um, how do you suggest that young people sort of break down that barrier?
That's another good question, and that's a tough one. I think I think sometimes it depends on the individual, but if we were to do a little broad stroke of the brush here, I would say that it's all about encouragement at that stage, and perhaps even your stage where the goal is to get them interested in science, interested in this case, climate change and renewable energy, and simply encouraging them to take that first step, because this is often their first step in high school. So just, whatever happens. As long as you put some effort in, you're going to find out some interesting information, and perhaps you'll find out some interesting recommendations that have already been said before, but now you're amplifying it, you're extending that audience, and and really sort of helping them develop that. And also maybe I might push back on your definition of the one truth here, actually, Ben, because there
Sure.
are debates in the social sciences where a lot of them, epistemologically and ontologically, they'll say that, I don't agree with that, because they'll say that perhaps human beings are creating the meanings or truths, so there can be multiple truths. So maybe I'll withhold that part of that content and keep that philosophy to myself, even though I might actually lean towards your definition, actually, but I'll hold it to myself and just encourage them and say that, hey, science is about advancing knowledge, and a lot of it a lot of it is we're supposed to be digesting that knowledge and uptaking that knowledge. So, you're contributing to science just by being involved in this competition.
Sort of, and I'm sort of bringing this into a bit of my area. I'm an undergraduate, so my area of like expertise is still sort of growing and starting off here. But I think that, so I'm a mathematician, and I think that this sort of what you mentioned there brings me, the first thing that it brings me to is this the common, I guess, question or rhetorical question that's posed in mathematics, which is mathematics discovered or is it invented, right? And I think that sort of goes on to what you're saying, right? If it's discovered, then there's one, there's one answer, there is one truth, right? As far as I can think, at least. Whereas if it's invented, then you can have different inventions, right? And I think that sort of goes for this whole topic, this abstract topic as a whole, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I guess that distinction between discovery and invention, which is something that we really don't know. Um,
Right.
yeah, it's very, very interesting. Um, so then, I guess a follow-up question there would be: let's suppose that a young person does not, for some reason, does not have access to um, offerings such as the Big Data Challenge or various, I guess these motivating competitions or motivating types of situations. Um, what would be the ideal first step if they wanted to just jump into research? What would be the first thing you would suggest them to do?
And this is at the high school level we're talking?
Sure. Or you can, if you want to make it broad to late high school, early undergrad, that's sort of general area. Or if you want to make two separate cases, that's fine too.
Right. Okay. Well, when typically I would say at that level, you're a young individual, you're trying to become independent possibly, and you're interested in research. I think you should really focus on what your priorities are and ask yourself what exactly are your priorities, because most of the time you're in school, you have maybe a part-time job or a volunteer position, and you should commit to that, and that adds to your resume, and don't downplay the importance of that. And I did reflect on this a while ago, because I often interact with younger folks and with the sports that I play. So, and I have to make myself personable to them and get along with them so that we can actually build the team chemistry and perform well together. So, And sometimes they'll even ask me for advice. And um, I early on I didn't know what to tell them, and then it took me, I went back on my own and introspected a little bit, and I wrote down a few things. So I am a little bit older, so so I wrote down a few things, and I don't have one thing actually, Ben, but I have maybe five things here. And I would first of all say try harder in school. And it's not just academically, it's the whole thing. It's about, dressing well, being respectful to students and professors and your teachers, attending, I wouldn't say all of your lectures or classes, but try to attend most of them, because there is something to be gained. Show up early and on time, participate in social events with your cohort, and try to learn from the successful students that you're friends with or you're interacting with. And obviously, school is not just restricted to the classes and the knowledge itself, but get involved in intramurals or a music club or extracurricular activities that align with your initiatives. So that's one. So try harder in school. Number two is spend some time thinking about your interests, strengths, and learn about different jobs. We're in this digital age where we have access to just about everything we want. The, a click away, it's your phone has it now at too, and you almost have to make a concerted effort to spend time alone and think about things. So spend time thinking about these things. Not just your field, but fields outside of what you're involved in. And it could be reading a book, taking a free online course. It could be having conversations with different people, and really, when most people are, at your age or younger, that they don't, you might be the exception to the rule, but most people don't really know what to do with their lives. And it doesn't just come magically to you one day, but you have to really think about what it is that you want to do. And it's a long process. It might take a couple years, maybe longer, but you find that out through placements, reading, coursework, um, volunteer positions. And if you don't start thinking about it, then someone else is going to decide what your job is going to be. And so don't just go through the motions. It's fine for the most part, but make a concerted effort. And moving on to the next point, the third point is get some work experience. Having an income is probably one of the most liberating feelings in the world. It also lets you acquire some key invaluable skills that you didn't know you needed. So chances are, I'm still learning. There are some things that I didn't know a year ago that now I know, and I didn't know I needed to know that. Um, Fourth point is don't waste your summers. Um, we're in this in the fall and the winter. You have deadlines. People have expectations of you. You have assignments, you have exams, and then that sort of guides you. And then in the summer, some folks, including myself when I was younger, I just threw it away. And definitely make the most of it. Use it as an opportunity to get some certifications, work, volunteer, get your driver's license, read some books, pick up a hobby, obviously spend time with friends, and maybe take some additional courses. And then the last point is what maybe the most important is focus on being a good person. Be someone who's fun to be around, and stop trying to impress other people. When you're young, it's so hard because um, it just so happens that we're all full of insecurities, and I don't think maybe that ever goes away, but you get more comfortable with it and over time. So we're all full of flaws. We have our vices. So just respect, just acknowledge that and work on it, and then try to be a good person. Ask questions, take interest in others, listen attentively, show love and support for your friends, and create meaningful relationships and experiences. And I know that maybe is stepping away from the realm of research. I know I'm stepping away from that question a little bit, but that it's all interconnected. You miss out on one of these things, and the research also takes a hit. So just explore your interests.
That's a fascinating answer. Wow, that there's a lot to unpack there, and I recommend if anyone's listening to like rewind about whatever 3 minutes or whatever and just listen to that again because there's a lot there. Um, and I know like even myself when I was listening to that, I was like, huh, I don't really do a lot of some of those things, or oh, I might be lacking in this area and maybe I'm strong in this area, right? And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to be stronger in one area, weaker in another, and to recognize that, right? Um, I think that's really important. But yeah, that's definitely some really good advice.
Yeah, and
Thank
also I
you.
have a question for you. So I know, you're younger than me. Maybe perhaps arguably in a different generation, and you grew up with the internet, or your generation did rather. I'm not going to assume. Um,
Yep, I did.
you know, okay, good. And so what do I'm sure you think about this, and what do you think, you're in computer science. Um, a lot of your work heavily relies on using technology, as it should. What do you think are the benefits and disadvantages, or maybe even neutral points, or the consequences of the digital age?
That's a lot. Yeah, so I'm a I don't want to phrase this. I'm going to say this term, but out of the political context, I'm a conservative in terms of technology. I'm a little bit skeptical about some of it. So I don't. I used to use. It's actually an interesting story. So I'm going to give an anecdote to sort of try and answer that question. I used to use social media quite a bit, as I think most people in my generation do. Um, a bit of an addiction of some sort, although I don't really know if it's fully an addiction, but some sort of a mental attachment to social media, or oh, I'm bored, I'm going to pull out my phone and go on social media, right? Um, Watch a YouTube video or whatever it may be, right? Scroll through Instagram, I don't know. Um, and and I one day I was looking at my phone. I have an iPhone, and in the settings, it tells you how many hours you spend on each category, I suppose, of app on your phone. And I looked on my social media category, and it was something like 20 hours a week. And if you break that down, it's like, okay, 20 hours a week, that's like what, an hour and a bit a day. Yeah, I could see you doing an hour and a bit in total every day. That sort of makes sense. Or maybe 2 hours a day. Like that's okay, that's fine. Um, then I realized that's a part-time job, right?
Yeah.
Like I could be doing an extra part-time job. At the time I was working a part-time job and I was in university and I was, in extracurriculars, and I was like struggling, and I'm like, what would happen if I was able to free up enough time that I could work another part-time job, right? Or in theory, I was already doing a part-time job. I could have worked a full-time job in terms of hours, right? Um, that sort of struck me, and I was like, this is really wasting my time. I get no enjoyment out of this. And really, the only benefit of it is, and I think the key benefit that I thought of was um, to preserve a sense of connection. Like, not, I wouldn't even say a sense, to preserve connection between me in terms of like strategic connection. Like, there's always a good reason to have some connection, right? So, what I ended up doing was I dropped all of my social media, um, pretty much everything. The only things that I kept, or the only thing I should say that I kept that I can think of off the top of my head was, I mean, I use YouTube because you have to use YouTube for a lot of things. I still do that. I don't like watch YouTube videos for the sake of watching YouTube videos, but I do like, if I need to, like, I don't know, watch a video of someone doing something so that I can, replicate it, then I'll do that. Um, but I guess the only other major social media I use is LinkedIn, because you sort of have to in today's digital age. Now, I guess what I found was, first off, I found I had a lot more time, and I think that was pretty evident from what I said. I had a lot more time to do a lot more things, which I took full advantage of. And I also took advantage of being able to have a bit of buffer time, a bit of time for just myself, just quiet, nothing, no technology, nothing, just sort of sitting there thinking, right? Which I think that contemplation and that thought has allowed me to really, how do I say, do better in my other areas, like my research and my, just academics in general, right? And so I know it's going a little bit away from what you were asking, but in terms of how does technology impact us as a society, I think that one of the major things that it does that I found is, well, I guess a few things. It reduces your time. It's just a massive time waster. And I find if you ask most people, they aren't going to tell you that they, I don't really see people who are like excited about being able to go and look through social media, like actively excited, right? Usually it's a more passive type of a thing, right? And so I guess that's the first thing. It's a time waster and it doesn't really bring you happiness. The second thing that I found about I guess social media, which I think can be broadly applied, is the how do you say? I guess one thing is the lack of meaningful connection. You're sort of trading in quantity for quality, I think, to some extent.
Right.
And then I suppose there was one other point I wanted to bring up there. It was, yeah, I think it's a lack of, and I can't put my finger on it quite yet, but it's a lack of perhaps focus or I guess deep thought that I think is required for a lot of skills. And I think in terms of issue, like I also think quite a bit about the I always describe it as an upcoming renaissance of sorts, which I sort of foresee happening in a world with more AI and with more robotic automation of menial tasks. And I think at that time we'll probably become a lot more of a creative type species with a lot more creative jobs. And I think that will be a time when we will really see the effects of the internet, the effects of not needing to think deeply about things. So it's sort of this idea of I don't even know if quality versus quantity sums it up well, but it's this idea of perhaps specificity, or perhaps it's a large amount of shallow knowledge versus a smaller amount of deep knowledge that we used to have in society. And I think that I think that's I guess that sort of is my ramble about that. But overall, I think that there are lots of problems with it. Another thing I came to the realization of recently was we're basically cyborgs at this point. I don't know if you've thought of that, but
Can you elaborate?
The phone, yeah, I sure can. The cell phone, you're carrying it everywhere you go, so it's essentially a part of your person. It contains some of your more personal, like pieces of information, right? You feel lost, like you feel like you're broken if it's not there, like you're missing something, right? Realistically, it's not connected to your body directly, but it is a part of you, right? To some fundamental extent, it is a part of who you are. And so I think that fundamentally points at the fact that we, I suppose, are cyborgish to some extent. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think that we, or I don't want to say that. I don't know if it's a bad thing or not. But I think that it is interesting to me that we can't really, like with the cell phones, you can't really put them down, I suppose. You can't really like they're a fundamental part of people now, right? You can't leave your house without your phone, right? It's like if you had like and I think I forget who mentioned it. It's really just a cyborg, or we're really a cyborg, but the only difference between it being physically connected to us and what we have now is just speed, just latency, right? So realistically, right? I think that's all it is, right?
Yeah, I think there is some truth to that it's always at arm's reach length. And then if you meet someone who doesn't have a phone today, which to be honest, I haven't yet, you're going to judge them whether you want to or not. And there's a lot of that. And Cal Newport in his book Deep Work touches on how we're kind of drifting away with the technology. And I do like his points and his thesis. And I mean, like you said too, there's a lot of benefits. There's some connection, there's inherent connection that comes with technology. And whether the conversations and the connections are diluted or not, I mean, I guess it makes sense with when you have 200 people in your network, are you really connected to those 200 folks?
Mhm. So like for me, like I and I think this was something I got from Cal as well, but I will text people like a lot more than I used to, right? And I don't know what he does specifically, but I know that like what I'll do is I will text, like, you know, people say, "Oh, what do you do if it's like someone's birthday?" And I'm like, "Well, I text them," right? Um, the odd time that I do need to use social media, um, I do it on my computer, right? And I don't have my password saved, right? Like those, I think those are some of his staples,
Hmm.
if I recall correctly. It's, you know, like it feels so much more personable and it feels so much more conscious, right? I'm
Yes.
consciously going on to do this. I'm not just like on Facebook. I haven't used Facebook in years now, but back when I did, I think if I recall correctly, I think it had like a button that you could, if when it was someone's birthday, it would pop up on your phone. It would say, "Hey, wish them a happy birthday." And then when you go into their comments section or whatever, you can click just to automatically populate with "happy birthday," right?
Yeah.
Um, and just hit send. Like you don't even have to type it. You just click the button and it sends, right? Um, and it's like, huh, like what are the ramifications of that, right? I think there's
Yeah.
some serious issue with that, um, because you may have like, let's say that you have, I don't know, say that you're really fortunate and you have like 100 people on your Facebook network who all sent you happy birthday. You didn't actually have 100 people who really cared that much, right? They made it so easy for them that they just had to click a button, right? Um, I'll send a text, I'll make a phone call, right?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. Yeah.
And
Now,
I
I should sort of put a bit of a caveat in there in the sense that I don't think that technology is bad. I just
Right.
think that we should be cautious. I think that we should tread lightly and
Yes.
be very conscious of where we're going.
Yes. Yeah. And on that note too, I know you mentioned cyborg, and maybe the bigger question here is, what does the human experience entail to you?
Mhm. Is that a rhetorical question, or do you want me to try and tackle it?
Yeah, I want you to try and answer
Okay.
this.
Okay. Sounds good. Um, yeah. So, oh, what does the human experience entail? I'm gonna try and do this about as atheistically as I can. The first thing that comes to mind is a very theist argument, and I don't
Right.
want to go down that route. But um, I think that yeah, I want it to be as applicable as possible. So I think that perhaps what it comes down to is sorry, I'm just in thought here. Perhaps I think I would almost sum it up as the human experience. I'm going to get this wrong, um, but I'm going to try. Anyways, I think the human experience sort of entails the, I think it entails, to some extent at least, entails the idea of difference. Um, I think that perhaps that's a fundamental aspect of what it means to be human. Um, and so I guess to to sort of ask the hidden, or to answer the hidden question there, I think that cyborgs don't particularly matter. I think it's an interesting thing to note, but I don't think that it particularly changes the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the core of humanity, to my understanding, seems to be something akin to difference. It's the observation of difference. It's the attempt to try and equalize difference, or to try and extend difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's this fundamental question of what is difference, right? So perhaps that's something that I think you can see on many levels. You can see that on a political level, right? You see the typical, I suppose, your typical extreme far right fascists are going to be, let's make this as different as possible, different classes of society. And then you look at your far right, or so your far left communists, who are more, everyone's equal perfectly to a T, right? Or you can even look, even if you take it away from the political lens, if you look at a question that people often ask is, what is my purpose, right? You're trying to find where you're different from other people, to some fundamental extent, right? You believe that you're different than some other people. Perhaps it comes down to, and I guess, so just so I can sprinkle a bit of theism in there, perhaps it comes down to what you view as I guess what you worship, right? Fundamentally, what I think if I recall correctly, I think the etymology of worship comes from something along the lines of worthship, so where you place your worth, where you place your highest value, and I think fundamentally, I feel like that is sort of core. It's what's different, right? What are you trying to strive for in that sense, right? What is the thing above you compared to you, right? And whether that's a set of morals, or whether that's some god or gods, or whatever it may be, or some form of practice, right? Like, it doesn't particularly matter, but I think that fundamentally humans exist, or human existence is defined by difference, to some extent. And I don't think that's a full answer, because I don't know that I have a full answer, but I think that that's an attempt at a 2-minute answer.
Right. No, I appreciate that. That is a tough question, and I don't have any answers myself. So I do like the first start of that it could be difference. It could be difference. And it is interesting that if we zoom out, then that fades away. Like if I go up
Mhm.
in an airplane, then can I really visualize the human experience from up there? And
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, and then I suppose then the question, I think a question that we may have to grapple with at some point, and I think you're sort of starting to see it with such division that we're seeing in these times, right?
Hmm.
Is, and it's only going to get, I think it's only going to get worse, is especially as we move to, say, Mars and other planets and get crazy, right? Is what differentiate, at what point, I should phrase that, at what point are we not human, I think is a better question. At what point do we cease to be human, and do we
Hmm.
cease to be human at some point, right?
Hmm.
Do we draw the line, right? And I think even in terms of, like, at a more fundamental level, and this is going to be very abstract and probably not technical enough for, with your background in the, I guess, the biology side of things, is I almost wonder, how do we know if we've evolved, right? Like
Hmm.
evolution, you look at evolution, it branches into different species and different, one core, I guess, ancestor will branch into various, I suppose, children, if you want to call them that, or derivative species. How do we know when we've evolved, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it's good. It's ought to happen. Like, I don't think we can assume that we're special compared to the past, the past whole slew of evolution that's gone on. I don't think that we're
Hmm.
special, but the question is, how do we know? right?
Right.
Obviously, that's a lot more long scale than like my lifetime or yours, but it is something that I think we should think about, right?
Yeah, where we're headed.
Fundamentally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's fundamentally that's an interesting question though. I don't know how we got down the philosophy rabbit hole, but
Okay, I'm
that's
sorry.
good. I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
Great.
Yeah. So at this point, I almost don't want to go down the rabbit hole of your research. If you want to, we can. I'd be cool to chat about it.
Yeah, no, let's maybe we can take it in a completely different direction entirely too, because I was listening to a topic because you mentioned Mars and other planets. I listened to a podcast with Elon Musk recently, and he was saying how he thinks the the government in another planet, let's say Mars, for example, should be completely different. It should be, I think he used the word a direct democracy, and where
Yeah.
the folks are deciding on each major decision rather than having an elected official or a group of elected officials to decide on a matter because they think that because there's always going to be conflicts of interests and corruption in that. So I mean, it's rampant in just about every government, unfortunately. So how can we do you think that that's the appropriate solution, that another planet, because we probably can't change our governments like that we're calling for a revolution, and I'm not I'm not willing to take it that far, but another planet is a direct democracy the way to go.
Um, I would push back a little bit on something that you said there. All right, or
Hmm.
perhaps you implied that what we have now is bad. I don't think it's bad at all.
Hmm.
Or like what we have now is inferior or is doesn't work. Um, I think on the whole, yes, it does have its flaws. Don't get me wrong, but I think that perhaps if you put it into a perspective, um, it was the best at the time, right? When this sort of idea was created, right? In the founding of America, let's say, or wherever you want to attribute this representative democracy type of an idea. Um, it was it was at the time the best solution. You couldn't have everybody go down to Washington, every
Hmm.
like couple months to do a bunch of votes. Like it's not going to
Yeah.
work, right? Um, Today we have the internet, right? And that changes a lot of things. I think that direct democracy at this point in time is a logical step. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I don't even know how. I don't even know that I would say that it's not a good idea to have it on Earth right now. I think that it is, but I also don't think that it's the best form of democracy either. I think that there's a
Hmm.
subsequent, right? Like there's going to be another iteration of this. Like realistically, there's a lot of ways you could really take that, but I can't predict, science where technological development will go. But I do think that, I think that, yeah, I think direct democracy is good. I think I also listened to that podcast.
Okay.
If I recall, I think it was Lex Friedman.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I'm pretty sure I listened to that one too. It was pretty good. But
Hmm.
I think, yeah, I think that direct democracy is. Uh, well, personally, I would leave a lot of it up to the political philosopher or political scientists, um, political philosophers. I think that they would probably have a better idea of what the ramifications of it are. There may be like unforeseen ramifications that I can't think of, but based on
Hmm.
my shallow view, it seems probably like a likely, how do I phrase this? It seems like a logical next step to humanity's
Right.
democratic or I guess political in general endeavors.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do feel like we'd have to tackle the whole misinformation, disinformation aspect of things as well before we even integrate that into society, because that could just influence things in so many large scale ways?
So I've done quite a bit of research on misinformation, disinformation, fake news, the whole slew of them. Um, but I'd love to get your thoughts. How do you think that we combat misinformation at a very abstract level?
Hmm. That's I've thought about it, and frankly, I don't have any good answers. And I've read the literature on it, and I don't see anything substantial in terms of the recommendations. The recommendations are great. Like, don't get me wrong. They're thinking a lot. They have ideas that I never even considered, and they're much smarter than me. And I'm sure you're much smarter than me in this realm too. And a lot of it seems like um, things that are temporary solutions. Um, but how do you tackle it? I think it requires some major legislation, unfortunately, and like major control over things. But I don't see that as a solution either, because there's going to be so much bad that comes with it. So I'm really
Mhm.
stuck. I'm conflicted. I don't have any answers.
It's the reason that I brought that up is because it's really fascinating to me that you made the connection between democracy, from leading from democracy to misinformation, because my research goes the opposite way. It tries to
Mm,
solve misinformation using democracy. So it's fascinating to me that that it's almost cyclical to some extent, right? You
right.
need democracy, or to fix or to have a successful democracy, you need to combat misinformation, as you said, which I would agree with. But then, from my point of view, one of the best ways to combat misinformation is democratically, right? So it's sort of this cyclical issue of um, if we don't have democracy, then how do we, right?
Hmm.
And I think that there's a fundamental, I don't know, I this may be very abstracted. I think it is going to be very abstracted, but um, I see cycles like that as really hidden, sort of a hidden, what came first, the chicken or the egg problem.
Hmm.
Um, and I think fundamentally, um, there may be no answer, but the way that I sort of think of it is you have, like, in math, I think of it in math terms, right? So you have like a circle, right? On a plane, let's suppose, and you've got whatever your idea, your concept going around and around in circles. But I think that people forget that that circle could be moving, right?
Mm,
Um, it may be trapped in a cycle, but the circle itself can be moving, right? Um, and so I think that that fundamentally answers the question of the chicken or the egg, to the answer that it doesn't really matter because something else is moving, right? Like it's almost a perspective thing, right? It'd be like thinking about um, the question of if we were to time travel, right? I'm sure you've heard this. If we were to say go back in time, the issue would be that we would be in the middle of space because everything is moving, right? Everything's constantly moving. Um, like the Earth is orbiting the sun, but then the solar system is moving in and of itself, and galaxies are moving, and everything's moving, right? So you can't, it depends on what scope you look at, right?
hmm.
Sure, it's cyclical, but maybe that cycle is moving, right? And so I think that fundamentally, or I guess, attempts to deal with that question of democracy versus misinformation. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know where it'll go. I don't,
Yeah.
that's a bit hard to predict, but I think that we'll get answers to both of them at some point in time, um, probably relatively around the same time. Um,
Right.
yeah,
And do you think you'll stay in this area of research?
um, probably not.
Okay.
To be honest, probably no. Um, it fascinates me. Uh, I shouldn't say that. I should say probably no, because I don't particularly know.
Hmm.
Um, I haven't figured that out yet, but
Right.
maybe. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I
Hmm.
just sort of I'll see where it takes me, you know, see where
Right.
things take me. Right now I've been doing a lot of research. So I've got one paper published, and I'm working on, I anticipate that by the end of the year I will have two more finished on misinformation specifically. Different areas. I don't really want to go too far into them just because, you know,
Uh-huh.
that side of things. But yeah, I think that yeah, I think I'll have about two more papers published or submitted or completed or something by then.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about it. I it
Hmm.
seems that my career is going in that direction, but I mean, I'm not going to stop it if it
Right.
does. But I guess we'll see, right?
Yeah, don't close any doors. And but congratulations on the first publication, because that, I feel like the first one's always the toughest, and after that it gets much more, or easier to handle, perhaps.
Well, even like in terms of the publication process, right? And I'm sure that's something that you probably know quite a bit about. And it's fascinating because and I'm going to quote one of my past podcasts, episode 6 of the podcast with Joe Pold. He described it as a black box, and that sort of fascinated me, as a purposeful black box.
Hmm.
Like very intentiously or intently a black box, consciously a black box, in the sense that it's made to be difficult um, to really understand or to really fully grasp, right? Um,
Mm.
and I think STEM Fellowship Journal does a really good job at making it as transparent as possible. I That's what I found. It seems a lot like I've published at other journals, and it seems a lot more. Yeah, it seems a lot more. Uh, how do you say? Um, Seems a lot more transparent, I suppose, of a
Yeah.
process. A lot less black box esque than some of these, you know, larger journals that we're looking at. Um, I think that's a fundamental issue that we may have to deal with in the publication space. But yeah, I think that STEM Fellowship Journal does a good job at that, at least.
Right. And there are a lot of issues that must be dealt with in the publication space, especially like the paywall aspect of things. It's like, why is this even a system? Like, how did we get trapped in, like, you are generating content and you pay to have that content distributed? What?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I see it. I see why journals need to be sustainable.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, I could see us shifting into more of a um, perhaps like a blockchain-esque model. I hate to use that because it's such a buzzword, but I like to use it in the sense that it conveys the idea that I'm trying to get across. More of a distributed model, where essentially you can publish on your own. I think that could be kind of neat. I haven't thought that idea through very well. Um, Perhaps like
Mm.
a communal, even just like, because realistically, right now, anybody could publish your own work, right? Theoretically, sort of ish. You could just go on your website and put your manuscript up there and call it a day.
Hmm.
Or maybe you get somebody to peer review it or whatever, right? Call it a day. Um, you could do that if you wanted to. It probably wouldn't hold as much clout, though, is the issue, right? Um, so I wonder if fundamentally, if how do you say, if eventually we might evolve into more of a distributed system where perhaps citations comes into account, perhaps if you want to think of it like a scientific thumbs up button comes into account, or you know
Hmm.
whatever it is, um, you could realistically bring that in. But then, like you said, then you deal with the question of well, I think misinformation and contentiousness are very closely related, but then
Hmm.
you deal with the issue of contentiousness. Um, you deal with the issue of what if this paper is contentious, right?
Right.
Um, sometimes contentious science is good science. It's sometimes very, very important science, right? However, that doesn't mean that like it's still contentious and people still might not use it as much or might not like it as much. It's a challenge. It's a big challenge.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things with society on the whole is we have to be very weary when we, like I said, conservative minded, right? So we have to be very weary when we walk. We have to be very, very cognizant of where we're going, and what the implications of that are. And I think that, I mean, I don't think that means stop all progress. Like, I'm not saying that by any extent, right? There's amazing things that we've had with technology and with progress in general.
Right.
But I think that when it comes to things like that, to changing up processes, I don't believe if it isn't broke, don't fix it. That's not a belief that I hold, but I think that we just need to be careful, right?
Yeah.
We need to keep our doors open, and we need to walk very carefully and very thoughtfully. Yeah.
And also involve others in that process when we're making those decisions, or before we make those decisions, to just make sure that we're doing it with a consensus almost. And obviously some ideas are out there and require bold steps alone, but for the most part, I think if you can persuade folks and you can really appeal to them, then and then bring them along the journey with you, I think that might be the best strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, sort of, since we're getting to the end here, just quickly, what, if you want to sort of sum up what we were just talking about there, what do you think, as somebody who's working in research, or in, I suppose, publication, I should clarify, what do you think needs to be changed in the publication space? I'm going to leave it broad. Or do you think that it needs to be changed? Sounds like you do, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
That's a great question as well. What do I think needs to be changed? There are a lot of things that are great about it. We have experts reviewing the content and ensure they can be viewed as gatekeepers, but the gatekeepers are good in this broadly, for the most part, they're good. And as long as the gatekeepers are appropriate and seem to, provide the right sort of criticism and feedback to your work. There are things, there was that huge debate that came up early on in the pandemic with preprint servers, with bioRxiv and medRxiv, where I personally had that internal struggle of, should I be using and citing these papers that haven't been peer reviewed for my grant applications and papers? And early on, I did use it. And then a few months in, there was just an influx of just sheer amount of papers, like bad quality, poor writing, just flooded that space. And it just became obvious, maybe not obvious, but it became a little bit more clear to our group and our lab that maybe we shouldn't be using this because it hasn't been vetted. There's no proof of validity. There's no proof of anything that's gone on here. And then in fact, we should just wait it out, make sure that there's actual published literature out there. So I think that's something we should be thinking about. And as we go towards that step of more open access, for lack of a better word, journals and articles, because I think knowledge and science should be accessible to everyone. I don't have any solutions on how we can do that currently. Making that knowledge. Obviously there are databases that compile journal articles behind paywalls and make it accessible to everyone. That's fine. I mean, more power to you. If you don't have any resources to or any subscriptions, then I mean, what better option do you have, right? So fortunately, I have all those
Mhm.
subscriptions that I need, so I don't have to resort to that. Yeah, that's what we should be considering. And, how do we curb the predatory journals that are out there that are looking for as much money as possible and as much revenue as possible, and um, putting bad science out. So I think those are the most salient things that are on my mind and should be on other scientists and researchers' mind as we go forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. I think that's a good concluding point there. Um, I will leave links to. Do you have any links you want me to leave in the description for people if they want to contact you? LinkedIn?
Um, yeah, just LinkedIn is fine. Yes, thanks.
Sounds good. Awesome. I will put Ab's LinkedIn in the description. If anyone wants to send them questions, you can always ask me questions. I always put that in the description. Yeah, thanks for watching or listening. Awesome.